One of the great things about the growth of online D&D playing is that it exposes you to a whole variety of GMs. In the old days, you just played with your friends or maybe people at a hobby store nearby, but now you can play literally 24/7 with players from all over the world as long as, they're playing in a language that you're fluent in. And one of the things about playing in so many different campaigns, as opposed to being the GM, which I typically was, I see all sorts of good and bad practices in terms of GMs. So today I'm going to promote a practice that I see a lot of GMs either never learned or forgot about or whatever. When you are describing your world to your players, you must think like Sherlock Holmes. You must become the world's greatest detective. Today I'm going to show you why you should do that and how you can do it. Hey y'all, this is KR King again. This is my YouTube channel dedicated to helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. As I alluded to in my intro, when you're creating your world and when you're describing it to the players, one of the most powerful tools you could use is to think like a detective. You're not telling a story that people just listen to, they're interacting with that story. You're creating a blueprint through which they make their actions. And that blueprint is made up of the information that you're providing them as they interact with the world. Now, in the real world, if you're, say, trying to solve a murder, you may depend on the work of a detective to find the relevant facts to identify the murderer and, put them in jail. Or if you want to find out about a person's background, you may also, enlist a private detective. Where did this person work and where did they live in the past? Have they ever had any financial troubles or legal problems? And think here in the negative sense, because if you ask someone, hey, I want you to investigate Fred, and then you go to them and say, okay, have they ever had any legal problems? And the detective says, I don't know. Oh, really? Well, okay, did they really live in, Pittsburgh for 6 years like they told me? I don't know. Well, you'd be like, you're a worthless detective. You would fire them. Same thing when people ask you questions about your world. If you're constantly saying, I don't know, they're going to think, well, did you prepare for this? And if you're always just making things up, which you can do, unlike a real detective, because it is your world, but pretty soon the inconsistencies start to pile on and people realize you haven't done your homework. You haven't thought this through like a detective. Now, it's important here, I use Sherlock Holmes as an example because most people know who he is, but he's a fictional character and no one has that kind of brain power. What you're really trying to do is use the detective's methods in terms of gathering the relevant information about your world, the NPCs, the history of that world, the items of that world. Now, in fact, in a creative writing endeavor, which is what creating a world in D&D really is, you are making up that information. You're not gathering it from the real world. But what's important is you're not creating it from the thin air. You're gathering it from your knowledge of the world, the way people interact with each other and live, from fantasy books or movies that you've seen, and importantly, other GMs and other campaigns that you've run in. All right, so what is the method of a detective? I would say first it is to observe everything without any preference, just the facts, as many facts as you can. And then step two is to sort those facts in terms of relevance to the task at hand. That is, what does the client want you to find out? Now, in D&D, your clients are your players. They're expecting you to report all the relevant facts of the world as they move through it. One more factor here, and like so many things about the storytelling aspect of D&D, it's kind of a mind-blowing concept. So even though you, as the GM, are acting as a detective, finding out the facts of your world and then reporting them back to the players, it's through the eyes and ears of the players that these facts are in fact discovered in terms of playing the game. They're moving through your world. So in that sense, the players are both the client and the detective. You, as the GM, act as the detective before the act of playing the game. When you create the world, when you come up with the facts, you then report these facts as the omniscient narrator, right? The conduit to the appearances of the world, the thoughts and actions of the NPCs and the creatures. All of this information, though, is filtered through the detectives in-game, which are the players. That's why it's the greatest game, my friends. So let's see how this dual nature works. Let's say your players have been contacted by someone, she needs their help. She's an elf. She's worked with Brenna at this monk's temple, and she's run into some trouble or something. They just sort of heard about this. She wants to meet them. So we're going to meet them at Zodie's Tavern. Again, in an earlier episode, I talked about Zodie, the starting point NPC, his tavern, his history, etc. But that's a place where, you know, it's kind of a neutral ground. It's not so much controlled by the various factions. Now, I'm always trying to keep things simple. Just like with the city map, I found a map of a tavern. That's what I'm going to use to create Zodie's Tavern. There's a thing about repurposing that I really like in that it stimulates your imagination. You're trying to figure out, as you look at the, you know, the layout of this tavern, what could be here? Oh, look at this interesting, you know, geometry of this room. I'll make it that. And if we look at this map, we have two stories drawn out. The first floor and the basement. So here we have the main room and the bar here, and then we have a kitchen back here. There was the ovens here telling us that. Then a storage room, which has a secret door to the basement. This means that the basement bar is for select guests only. Perhaps it's a meeting area for a secret society or shady characters, because Zodie has a history as a smuggler and whatnot, so this may be where, you know, he meets people. If we look at this basement original drawing, it has what seems to be like a fighting pit, I think it was. I'm not going to use that. So what I'll do is I'm going to go into GIMP, and I'm going to change that really quick. And I'm going to increase the speed on this. I don't want to go through how I copied and pasted all these sections together. And then I will add a secret door in the floor that leads to a tunnel out to the wharf. Because I think with Zodie's smuggling reputation, that'll be kind of a cool thing. Maybe later on there's going to be something going on with the players. So I'm just going to put that in. So now that I've investigated the drawing of Zodie's Tavern, I'm going to populate the front room as it would be when they arrive to meet up with this elf. I'm not going to necessarily worry about the other rooms. They're not going to see those unless they go into them. They're going to see this front room. So, who is in here? Well, I'm going to put Zodie, the owner. Then we have his wife, Valina. She's this daughter of a barbarian, again, from an earlier thing. And then I'm going to have a bouncer slash bartender named Bartus, an old army friend of Zodie's. Then I'm going to have a cook and a waitress, you know, working the crowd. The cook will be in the back. Maybe coming back and forth with food, but typically in the back. Going to be people there. In fact, it's crowded with people. So how many of these in my investigation do I report back to the players? What's important? Well, I'm looking in here on a typical night. I'm thinking there's some sailors in here, you know, from different trading vessels. This is a bar on the wharf. I'm also going to have a smuggler that I'm going to call Hemlock. He's going to be here with 3 of his crew members. He's an associate of Zodie. He's not really a friend, but they've done some stuff. But he's a guy that if there's trouble, he'll get involved because he's Zodie's ally. And then I'm going to throw in a rogue that's working for the Ezran clan. They're always trying to observe what's going on in Zodie's. And this, as I said, section of the wharf is independent. So they're always going to be there. And I'm going to have a wizard friend of his. Now, these are not high-level people or whatever. This is, you know, being spies and whatnot, but they're just in there having a drink, keeping an eye on things. And the rest of the people are going to be ordinary folk, which means they just want to go eat, drink, have a good time, not get in any trouble. So I'm not really going to worry about them because if there is trouble, they're going to scatter. They're not going to get involved. So now we're ready to report to the client as they become the detective. We're going to play the game. How the players get to the bar and whether or not things change on the way from the time they first, you know, were contacted by this elf, we're just going to assume, we're not going to worry about that for this example. We're just going to have them walk into the bar. And obviously all the players can see is this front room, which you can, obviously if you're doing this digitally, you can do a line of sight thing. You can also, it's possible, using something like GIMP, to actually mask off areas and create, you know, a specific map for this if it's a tabletop game. So the first relevant facts that any detective does, the geography of the room is going to be obvious with a map to the players, where the windows and doors are, the stairs in the back, how the tables and booths are laid out, the position of the bar, etc. And I talked in an earlier episode about using the 5 senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch to enhance the descriptions you use of any scene. And the same thing is here. You don't have to go overboard on it, but it can really be fun if when your players first enter the bar, they hear something like this. When you first enter Zodie's Tavern, you're overwhelmed by the stench of tobacco, stale beer, and vomit. So strong you can taste it. Your eyes burn from the smoke, and you can barely hear yourself think over the din of music, laughter, curses, and calls for more ale. You're jostled on all sides as you move through the room, searching for the elf. All right, so that's, a little hokey. So what is the relevant information that you report when the players walk into the room and see things? Well, of course, it depends on whether they're looking for something or not. Obviously, if they weren't, they just go up to the bar or find a table and kind of look around. But here they've come for a purpose. They're looking for this elf. So they're going to scan the room and say, do I see her anywhere? They might just move around the room looking at each table, oh, what's this? Or they might be a little more paranoid or a little more careful. They might just go up to the bar and kind of check things out. Now, at this point, you got to think about your style of running the game in terms of, do you give the players only the information that they specifically ask for, or do you give them some information that would just be obvious, which is what I tend to do. Now, in a crowded bar, if there's a lot of tobacco smoke or whatever, maybe they can't see everybody right away, but give them 10, 15 minutes, and especially if they're walking around the bar, they're going to be able to see who they see. But the question is, do you describe each person, every single person in this bar, as they're looking around? Or do you describe if maybe they recognize, oh, there's that guy from the Ezrin clan, or, oh, there's that smuggler guy, only if it's relevant. If they ask you to describe everything, again, is that really relevant to what's going on? Now, if they say to you, is there anyone looking at me, staring at me or looking suspicious? You can make a perception check if there is. Again, like the rogue who's there with the Ezrin clan isn't necessarily going to look at them suspiciously, but he's also going to be disguising his intent. So again, you got to factor that in. Now, again, the other thing is, think about, in terms of the relevance of this information, what you would think about when you walked into a bar in the real world. You'd be like, oh, okay, is it a dive bar or is it upscale? If you go into a bar and it's all bikers, you're going to act differently than if you go into a bar and it's all businessmen. Same thing in D&D. Is it nobles? Is it all peasants? Does it look like a thieves' den? What is the situation? Now, in Zodie's Tavern, I have established the fact that it actually has a very mixed crowd. You get the usual wharf people and whatnot, but you also get some nobles and merchants, people that kind of like this bar because, again, it's very independent and wide open. And then something that would be very obvious, if there is a, dragon head mounted on the wall, the players are just going to notice that. Versus some just picture or, antlers on the wall, it's not that important. So these are all things that the players would see upon entering and looking around. If they see the elf there, if you decide that's the way I want to go, they just go over there and sit at the table, and then they find out what she wants their help for. If they look around the bar and she's not there and they wait a while or whatever, they may ask the bartender, maybe Zodie himself, hey, have you seen this elf or whatever? And they're going to decide whether or not they want to tell them. If she's in trouble or something, they may know that. So I'm going to say for this example that she's not there. And when they ask the bartender, have you seen her after a while, he very surreptitiously hands them a note. She says on the note that it was a little too dangerous here and I had to take off. And she gives them instructions, a house that they can meet at. So they're going to go there. So they then leave Zodie's Tavern to go to this house. Again, are they followed? Does anyone react to this? And again, do they perceive this if they're checking? And again, maybe the rogue and the wizard follow them just out of habit. They have heard something about these players depending on what the level they're at, and they think, what's going on? The note, this and that. So you made the investigation into Zodie's Tavern, you found the relevant information, then you reported it to the players, balancing between what they asked about, information they wouldn't just notice, and stuff they would just notice. So I'm going to be using this technique throughout as I describe various encounters I set up. And the next thing that I'm going to do is a classic detective thing, the scene of a murder, right? And this is going to be an area filled with clues, filled with information that's relevant to, a crime, a murder. And the players are going to see this and they're going to have to use their powers of observation to discover things, to make decisions about things, but also you as the detective before the game that's going to get ready to report this to your clients has to go through this work as well. It's really fun. The more you do this, the more you get used to it as a technique, the better you get at it, and you begin to see, oh, this really does work. So I hope you like what you've seen. Please subscribe to my channel. Always looking for more subscribers. Leave comments. Love to hear what you're thinking about. In the meantime, my friends, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.